welcome to the Sisyphus complex solution, episode 12. So I'm just fiddling around to see if I can get. Yep, I've got my cursor back. Normally, I've been sort of trying to train myself to say what the number episode is and what the episode is called, but I still haven't decided on a name for this one yet. So I'm gonna have to be doing that between now and tomorrow, and I hopefully publish. This particular episode is going to be falling in line with what I'd kind of suggested might happen last week, which is that I'm going to have to drop the FOWEFUN segment because I want to finish off the Cabinet Office, and there's within the 4 offices that I'm going to be running through, one of them in particular represents quite a significant data dump. And as much as I always say that I've got some notes with me, I've got quite a few notes with me this week, and I'm really going to have to pay attention to them because there's no way in fuck would I remember all of this. I'm already doing my second recording and that because I couldn't remember what the hell I was doing. But anyway, I wanted to crack on, and because this is probably going to be a fairly long one, and for those people that love data, I know there's somebody out there in particular and that knows that I like my data sheets, but it's going to be one of those ones where if you like numbers, you'll love this. But anyway, I've got a few little bits in there and that because of the removal of FOWEFUN this week. I've included just a couple of little tidbits and that to make up for it. So let's move forward. I want to put this particular piece of information in there because it's going to be critical when I show the savings that have been accumulated so far from identified savings that could be made. I forgot to put it in last week. Again, with this and with everything else that you're going to be seeing in the episode, links are in the description as always. And what I'd forgotten to do was calculate how much the UK contribution was to the International Telecommunication Union as its tentacle of the UN. Obviously, like I say, last week, there's lots of companies that are involved in that as well, but I wanted to know what the UK government hands over, so that's the contribution. When you look at the page for yourself, should you decide to do so, you will find that you have to do a little bit of a calculation because they're, as per usual, with all things these days, they never actually put anything in a straightforward way. They don't go by it costs this much, they go in units. It's typical bollocks to try to stop people looking into things or to get people to waste more time, which they don't want to do, and which I've done instead. Anyway, I did it for your benefit. What can I say? Right, so there's a lot to get through this week. No idea how long this is going to be, but let's get on with it and see. So, first department that I want to look at is the Government Estate Management. Obviously, we've got the what I've become accustomed to over the last few weeks, and that is the amazing levels of transparency with no information as to how much this particular department is feeding from the taxpayer. It can be in certain situations, and that way you have just a few people that are responsible, and from their base salary on another position, it covers it. I seriously doubt it, but benefit of the doubt, which I won't give, but never mind. So let's see who these people are, because again, very little information around them in terms of what they will produce from the government website. You have to look a little bit deeper, which I've done. Not that there's a massive amount to find, but essentially, I mean, the government estates management, it does end up being incredibly pointless because they are essentially what is a sub-team of the well, not a sub-team, they're supposed to be sort of an overview of the Government Property Agency, which, if you remember, I looked at previously in that and showed how poorly they perform. So obviously these people are not very good at oversight at all, are they? So anyway, the first thing that jumped out from the information that I was being able to glean was that, as with the highlighted in red there, and that it's this standard bullshit terminology of it's got to be sustainable for the environment and blah blah blah, meaningless crap. I mean, it literally is the case that anything that anybody produces these days, and that it's just the same old keywords that mean absolutely nothing. So anyway, because there was such limited information that I could get from this, I thought, well, okay, let's just have a look around and see what I can find. I did come across 2 reports that I then had to see if they were worthwhile or not. One was from the National Audit Office, which didn't give the numbers that I would have expected. I mean, that's the whole point of the National Audit Office. Why audit something when there's no numbers in it? But anyway. But that was from 2017, and I'd come across another one which I'll move into shortly, from 2018, and that was the one that I decided to go with because of being that 1 year more up to date. But the thing about this, though, and that immediately, is that if you remember what I was saying last week about that Committee on Standards in Public Life, and what was it, they had their seven key words that are supposed to be, you know, how wonderful we all are with our openness and integrity and blah blah blah. I mean, this is yet more evidence that when they're not providing the data, they don't follow their own rhetoric. So this is why I do think that when you have these people that are spewing out these key words that don't hold the meaning that they should, that is very much an area that does need to be clamped down on. Essentially, it is this. I mean, I'd use the term last week that it's a bastardisation of the English language, but it's not even that, really, is it? I mean, it's just laziness. It's just repeating words that they think make them sound clever, but just have got no meaning or purpose or anything about them at all. It's just absolute nonsense. So anyway, even more reason then for this Committee on the Standards of Public Life, or whatever they were called, all the more reason why they should be gone. So let's move into... So I'm paying attention to my notes for a change. Right, so this is the report that I did find, and you can see it does have July 2018 written on there, so I am telling the truth. The thing about this one is that when I started to look at it, there was 2 photographs, 2 individuals that were writing the foreword and having produced this report, and the fella who was the minister at the time was Oliver Dowden. He's subsequently moved on to digital, culture, media and sport. You see, I'd have sat there going for ages if I hadn't got my notes with me. So that's where he is now. So he was involved in this government estates previously, and I'm going to pick on him a little bit, and this is kind of a little bit where this making up for the FOWEFUN comes from. Before I get into the little bits and pieces that was in this so-called strategy. So the reason why I'm going to pick on him is because why not? Why not indeed? I mean, I used to tag him into stuff that I used to write on LinkedIn, and it was a bit of a waste of time, a bit like Steve Baker, but there you go. Now that I've looked at him in a little bit more detail, I can understand why, yeah, I wouldn't have anything to say. So, the key reason really why I'm picking on him as such is because I think it gives a good indication as to how it is that we need to really think about the politicians that take up their departmental roles. I mean, are they really the right person to be doing that? For example, if you wanted to have a portrait painted of yourself, are you going to hire a bricklayer? You're not, are you? So I think there are elements of that kind of logic that need to take place in terms of what we actually do around who qualifies as a politician and who qualifies as somebody to be able to lead a particular department. I think it's something that most people have recognised for a long time now, but you know, why not just state the bloody obvious? So one of the things that I do want to do is have a look at Oliver Dowden in this respect, because, like I say, at the top you've got the entry for him, and that from Wikipedia, and it gives you his career and what have you, such as it is. And he's got absolutely no experience whatsoever in property and real estate or anything like that. he's never been anywhere near it. I mean, from what I can see here, and that oh, you'll have to check the Wikipedia page yourself and that. But before his career and that, you've got his education, and essentially he read law at Trinity Hall, Cambridge. Now, as much as that might sound very impressive, the Trinity Hall, Cambridge part, it's the read law that I'd be interested in, because that basically means you've gone to Trinity College, well, Trinity Hall, Cambridge, and come out without a qualification. I'm assuming. But anyway, either way, reading law and property real estate, not the same thing. Painting, bricklayer, same thing. So is this somebody that should really be involved with that? So what experience does he have? Well, his first job, which is again is a slightly strange scenario in that, because his first job was working with Conservative Research Department, so in with the political party straight away, and he did that from age 26, which to me is a little bit late as a first job, if you think about it. But anyway, ho hum, you know, certain people have different ways of getting somewhere. But the part that I'm interested in is the fact that in 2007, for 2 years, he went to work for Hill Knowlton. And the reason why Hill Knowlton is of interest to me is because, if you remember when I ran the episode about the lobbyists and essentially all the marketing companies and so forth, he'd worked with them for that couple of years. Now, is it a bit naughty to do guilt by association? Probably, but you know, I mean, if you was to find out that ISIS were terrorists, but then they offered you a job several years after you knew that they were terrorists, would you go and join them and think, well, surely it must be all right now? You wouldn't really, would you? I mean, for Hill Knowlton to still exist, I mean, there's a little bit more interest around this and that, because this is where it will tie into the FOWEFUN part, because there are associations between Hill Knowlton and the United Nations. Surprise, surprise. But the particular example that I've got on here is that, I don't know how widely known this is, but this article from January the 15th, 1992, it's Deception on Capitol Hill. Essentially, they fabricated a story which helped essentially force the, if you remember the first Gulf War, where the invasion of Iraq, that basically came about because, and again, you'll see within the links in the description, there is actually even Wikipedia recognises this one. There's reference to a young girl by the name of, if I can pronounce this right, Naira, something like that. Anyway, where they said that, or rather, she went and gave this testimony to say that, you know, Gaddafi had ordered the soldiers to just throw babies out of their incubators and all this sort of stuff and that, and all these atrocities going on. Well, it turned out that she lived in Washington. She was the ambassador's daughter, or something like that. Yes, she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. So some level of untruth there, and then it turned out even further that the statement that she gave was just one that she'd read off a sheet of paper that had been produced for her by Hill Knowlton. So not exactly the most ethical people in the world, and Mr. Dowden that went to work for them for 2 years. Now, the thing about the entry that they have in Wikipedia for that particular piece of lack of integrity They called it, and it has been known subsequently as, a classic example of modern atrocity propaganda. And this is an organisation that's a part of the lobby group still to this day in the UK. Now, this sort of stuff was obviously happening out in Washington. This is what they did in the US. But if that's the sort of shit that they get up to, they're not going to limit it to the US office, are they? And they go a little bit further, because bringing things up to date a little bit. Don't know if you're familiar with this particular story, but how the World Health Organization hired Hill Knowlton to help with their propaganda to get the little, I don't know if they're called stars or whatever they're supposed to be. I think I recognise the one, I think it's that Lady Gaga. I've got no idea who the other one is. Anyway, hiring people like this to turn around and go, oh no, everything that the World Health Organization says is true. So, atrocity propaganda much? And the thing about it is that with all these scenarios, you always get people that will turn around and say, well, you know, they're doing the right thing and that, and oh, it's probably just a conspiracy theory again and all the rest of it, except for the fact that there's a bit of a, am I going to do this? Oh, I've got it right. Right down at the bottom part, and that is actually a part of the contract that they signed and had to declare out in the US. It is declaring that they did have this contract with the World Health Organization, and then up above me is the time and how much. So between 1st of May 2020, 15th of June 2020, they were paid $135,000 to spew propaganda on behalf of the World Health Organization. Chances of that being the only contract they've had with them, fairly slim. So, Oliver Dowden, he then obviously, after that 2 years, and that he went straight back into the Conservative Party and that, and moved on to then get elected. So the entire experience that this man has to be writing a strategy around property is to have read law and to work with atrocity propagandists. You have to be careful who your ministers are sometimes. So I thought that was important to just add in, so we've got a little bit of FOWEFUN involved. Okay, so let's move on a little bit further. This particular part, the graph at least, is somewhat unusual in terms of the onboarding. And I wanted to put this up because there's a little bit of an explanation that's going to come in the subsequent slide. Now, if you notice in that over these numbers of years and that of which departments are going to be onboarded, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, surely to Christ, if you're working in a government, you don't have to go out and then persuade other departments to go with a programme or a policy that has been decided. I mean, that's the whole point. You make a policy with assuming that, I mean, there should, I'm assuming, yeah, assuming somebody thinks, you should understand that everybody at some point in that, they're all going to be sat in at the ministerial table and having a conversation together and say, right, I'm coming up with this particular strategy. It has this particular impact on your department. Are we agreed on what we're doing? Yes, great. Why do you need to be onboarded in this fashion? You know, I mean, it's going to take you, what, 4 years to talk to somebody that sat right next to you. Doesn't make an awful lot of sense. And the particular thing about it is that I want you to notice that from April 2021, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, they will be onboarded at that particular point in time. Keep that in mind for a minute. So, where am I on my list? Blah, blah, blah. Right. The bit at the bottom that I've got is, again, it's reference that you find in most of these reports. The nonsense about all the carbon reductions. Once again, there's no scientific method involved in any of this. So it's just following a load of blurb based on something they know nothing about. And the fact that they're going on to say about the extent of the reduction of carbon, 80%. And then 40% of that, and that means to do with the energy consumption and carbon emissions coming from the buildings. It's that smacks to me of this whole sort of we're going to knock everything down and build it all again. Which yes, no wonder they're trying to knock down history, because you're going to have to knock down everything, aren't you? This is it's not right. It's not right. Anyway, so remember, Foreign Commonwealth Office, not until 2021, and yet they combine something to do with an estate strategy and onboarding the Foreign Commonwealth Office, which I don't know. The in focus part, tying it in with their carbon emission crap. And this is, again, just as a reminder, this is about property and the estate owned by government. And the example that we've got comes from the department that apparently won't be onboarded until 2021. And remember, this is done in 2018. So how are they using an example for people that have not been involved? And the ridiculous thing is that, because it's about estates, it's about property and that, and here we go, oh, they've switched the plastic cutlery and food containers to biodegradable alternatives. Oh, well, there you go then, because that's got a lot to do with property, hasn't it? So you've got a department that apparently haven't been onboarded yet coming out with crap that's got fuck all to do with property. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that you're going to get from somebody that is A, spewing out keyword agenda, and B, coming from somebody that has got absolutely no clue what he's talking about. Experience of these people is supposed to be relevant, and when somebody's putting a strategy together, I mean, introduce China coffee cups and a 50p latte levy. I'm retards. Oh, I bought the wrong beer this week as well. I mean, I've picked up my Hobgoblin as normal, but I've got that IPA rather than my usual Ruby. I don't like IPA, but I bought it now, so I've got to drink it. Hard life. Anyway, so I mean, this is just to give an example of that as to the type of background that somebody can have, whether it's dodgy or not. Do they actually know what they're talking about? And surely to Christ, when somebody reads these reports, somebody somewhere has got to be sat there and going, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, it's just rubbish. This particular part, I mean, I couldn't help it in that, because it's, if you do click through and have a look at the report yourself and that, I mean, yes, you will see a couple of instances where they're giving examples of, oh, we're doing this in Edinburgh, and oh, we've got this up north, and blah blah. But what can't be escaped is the sheer volume of London, 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 London. Oh, should we do a little bit else of something else in London? And then you wonder why I've got a problem with 73 MPs from London. I mean, oh, give me a fucking break. The amount of times they're just constantly going on about it. I can't be doing with it. And the other thing that caught my eye, is just as a little bit of a final bit of a snippet, is the part that I've got highlighted in red, where around the 5G, and the government will be the provider of choice. Well, that's interesting terminology, isn't it? That does have relevance to some other stuff that I'll go into in the next department, which is the one where there's the real data dump. But bit of a strange thing for them to say. I mean, why would that be included in something to do with property. I mean, I understand from the experience I've had in property myself, and that they have this god-awful term called an intelligent building, and all that means is you've got plug-in bloody internet points. But they wouldn't mention 5G connectivity in terms of the building. So yeah, it's a bit of an unusual one, but I thought I'd just give that little bit of further backup to what I've been saying previously in terms of this heavy concentration on London that really does need to have a little bit of a rethink. Right, so now I'm seriously going to have to concentrate on my bloody notes, because the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, this one is extensive, as I'm sure anybody that understands around about government infrastructure projects will understand. The significant part around this is that, yes, I have got the links up there, and that's, no, sorry, I've got one link, I think, that I'll be putting in the description, because it's from that link that you can get access to a couple of different documents, but in particular there's one that comes in several different formats. One is Excel, then there's CVS, and then I can't remember what the other format is, but it gives a list of all the relevant data as to the projects that they're undertaking. I've downloaded that and reworked it and put it into a format that actually makes much more sense than the shitty way that they've done it. And I've done that because it's important to understand as to what kind of values it is that we're talking about. And I've got to be very, very careful as I'm going forward into the other departments as to whether some of the funding here is purely based on projects, or whether some of it is included in other budgets later on. Because I think as far as I can see so far, and that they are being kept separate, and I've got a funny feeling that a lot of this is not being part of the budget. Now, when it's not part of the budget, it's then all this, it's off balance sheet, all this kind of terminology. I want to be very careful around this, because I have to start breaking things down with the project and that into annual values, dependent on the life of the project and things of this nature, because there are, I don't actually see how it is possible that I'll come across this problem of needing to allocate it to each different department, because within the project authority, each project is assigned to a specific department, but it's still handled under the project authority, if you see what I mean. So this is where there could be some fiddling around the edges, but as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, again, the proper transparency around things, it should be a case of being included in the budget. I mean, if you've got an asset, great, you've got an asset. It still ends up as part of the budget. It still ends up on your balance sheet, all the rest of it. Otherwise, if you're faffing around like that, you end up with a black hole. And I'll come to have some explanations around this a little bit later on anyway, and that's try to tie all this together. Now, the immediate thing that comes to mind, or can be seen, not come to mind, if you look at the top graphic there and that, and how it says the whole life cost of all of their projects is 448 billion, and then you'll notice my number that I've included there of 636 billion. There's a reason why there's a difference, and the difference is quite specifically that once I add up all of the values that they have presented within their Excel sheet, it does indeed come to just shy of 448 billion. However, there's a range of different projects with no value. I can actually calculate from other pieces of information, not across all of them, but across the ones where they haven't provided the data, I can find the values for some of them. Hence, my number comes out 200 billion more. Now, I've already started going off track, and I should be. I said I was going to pay attention to my notes, and I've already gone off track, which is really naughty of me. So anyway, right, the ones that are not stated as having values, The reason why they will not be having a value stated is because they said that they're exempt under Section 43 of the Freedom of Information Act 2000. In certain circumstances, I can understand that, and you'll understand why a little bit later on as well. So essentially, what I've done is like I say, I've reworked the sheets. I'm going to be running through these with you. There was 10 of these high value projects that had no final value, and of the ones that I still couldn't figure out how much the project is worth, there's a very distinct possibility that this number is more like 1 trillion. So, you know, I can only break it down onto the annual cost of what it would be based off of what I can see in from the project's length. So for example, if there's a project for 10 years time, you just divide the total amount up on the annual basis. Right, so the bottom chart that we can see there, giving the supposed fluctuation or lack thereof, which in the report itself and that they kind of suggest that that's a good thing, saying that the values are stable, which I don't really get the logic of that. I mean, yes, you have new projects coming online and other projects completed and things of this nature, but you shouldn't necessarily be aiming to have the same level of commitment in terms of monetary value, especially at this sort of level. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to get at here. And the numbers that they've got there, I'm assuming whether that's I think it's the number of projects and the numbers of projects that are finished. Initially, when I first started looking at that, I thought, is that the amount of money? Because obviously that you've got the numbers at the top, the 448 billion and so forth and that, and I kind of thought, well, is that the amount of money they're spending? But it isn't. It's obviously the number of projects. But anyway, so yeah, the key issue with this and that is, like I say, is identifying how things are going to work out at the end when I come to the end of putting all this stuff together. So, from this basic overview that you've got here, let's move into a bit more of a deep dive. So, I'm separating this according to departments. Next page. The data that you can see at the top is essentially how I've reworked their spreadsheet, and I've reduced the amount of information because it's essentially there's not the need for absolutely all of it. If you want to see it for yourself, like I say, you can download it and have a look. The only part that I've realistically added is the annual average, and obviously a note at the side. Everything else is just what's come straight out of their information. So let's start off with BEIS, Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy Department, which is one that I might be moving into next. I'm not too sure at the moment, because there's some of the other cabinet offices are, I know damn well, going to be exceptionally heavily data based, and so I might pick off some of the smaller ones to begin with and move into the real heavy discussion parts later on. Sort of leave that till later, but let's see. Right, there's a couple of the inclusions within BEIS that I've made some notes of that I'm not overly sure about. I mean, you will notice within all of these, the values for each project is exceptional. That then goes into a point that I'll pick up on later on. So, in terms of the project that is called the Heat Networks Investment Project, and something that is called as a self-sustaining heat network, I don't really know what that means. It's a bit of a bizarre one, that. And the reason why it's slightly bizarre is because, I mean, I know that there are some projects that are taking place where they've sort of got like you're developing heat from underneath the home, and it's the warm air and pressure and things like that, and that fed through, and so that's essentially self-sustaining. Does it make your home nice, warm, and toasty in winter? It keeps you relatively warm, but I mean, it's not that good. It's certainly not enough to be able to stop you from having to wear several jumpers in winter. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what they're talking about with that one. So I mean, at the right point, it would be worth having a look. The only other thing that I can think of with that, based on some of the other programs that government tends to run, is whether they're actually referring to everybody having central heating and using and where they're talking about this self-sustaining. It won't be self-sustaining, but essentially in that it's using the energy that they've decided should be used for central heating. I don't know, it's a bit of an unusual one, that one, so I thought I'd pick up on that. By the way, the projects that are highlighted in red, that means that they've already been completed. Right, there's another one that I've picked up on, which is, where have I? Yeah, the new polar research vessel. Oh, for fuck's sake, this is the Wanker Attenborough ship. I remember when this particular project was launched, and they said that they wanted to have a name for the vessel, and the name that actually won was Boaty McBoatface. Which, as far as I'm concerned, if they're running the competition, if that won, that's what it should have been called. But, you know, as per usual, you get the arsehole, so oh, no, we couldn't possibly do that. We have to call it the Wanker Attenborough ship. Not the wanker part, but it'd be nice if somebody sort of crossed out the David and put wanker, but there you go. The key reason why I've highlighted this one, really, is, first and foremost, I mean, this is a ship to go out to the Arctic or wherever to go and have a look at polar bears and come back and tell us how all the polar bears are dead, and then subsequently find out that there's more of them than there were the day before, which happens every year now. Every year you get the same shit. Oh, the polar bears are dying, the polar bears are dying. And then you get the latest news that comes through. So, well, actually, no, there's fucking hundreds of them, thousands. They're all over the bloody place. But then if you look at the value, I mean, I do know a little bit about the cost of building a ship. I have sold a few large ships in my time, and they've got this down as £1.4 billion for a ship to go out and have a few hippies on board and then come back and lie and probably get stuck in the ice that they keep saying doesn't exist. 1.4 billion. I could build them a massive, huge, enormous luxury liner. Probably 3 of them for that much. So if there ain't some piss taking going on, I don't know what is. So anyway, the next part that picked up on this was to do with the next Magnox operating model. Yeah. The thing about that was the I mean, it's decommissioning nuclear facilities, which is long overdue and a problem that we've really been concerned about, or I've been concerned about, with all this stuff about, we need to change the energy to be run by fairy farts and I don't know, the sunbeams coming out of Greta's arse, something like that. There's a large number of nuclear facilities inside the UK, a large number, I think something like about 12 of them, that are long overdue for decommissioning, and they keep putting it off. And when they do get decommissioned, our energy supply is going to take a massive hit, and you're not going to replace it with sunbeams coming out of Greta's arse. So that's a problem. But within the description they've got in there, and it does mention NDA. Now NDA is something that I'm familiar with in terms of a non-disclosure agreement. I don't really see how that applies to this. So I'm not entirely sure what NDA means in that respect. Non-decommissioned, I don't know, something that I might need to have a look at anyway. But the key thing around this, and that is that the total value for BEIS then comes out at the numbers that you can see here. So obviously the 216 million, or sorry, 216 billion, I've made sure that I take out those two projects that have been completed. And then the estimated annual cost is literally just, as I explained before, and what that project length is, what that would be over a yearly basis, add up that amount. So it does mean that we would effectively then be paying out on an annual basis 14 billion. Okay, so that goes into the pot for what they're going to be pissing out of later on. So we move into CO, which means the Cabinet Office. Now, the Cabinet Office here, if you remember when I started looking into the Cabinet Office, I'd mentioned that they had a budget of 655 billion, which was for vanity projects, including one called Verify. Well, quite clearly from this information, they were sticking that particular project into their vanity project where it should not have been, because the numbers don't match. And so the 655 billion, what they're using that for exactly, not sure, because like I say, it can't be the same thing. The numbers don't add up. So the only way that I can figure to do this is that 655 billion must be for other vanity projects, and then this essentially has to go on top of that. And so yeah, you end up with I mean, there's nothing really in there that I want to highlight especially, because it tends to be all this, oh, we're going to have another government platform, another IT services and all this sort of stuff, which when I've made my notes into the RASIC, I've made note of how everything needs to be reviewed because of the procurement processes and the actual intentions and all this sort of stuff, which again is something I'll come into a little bit later on. There's areas around this that I would be severely questioning, but the key point for the moment for you to understand is the Cabinet Office, that's an additional on the annual basis, because remember, I'm trying to make sure that the numbers add up to the budget that they've suggested for the period. So on the annual basis, you're looking at 102 billion in addition to the 655 billion that was allocated from previous bullshit. So anyway, let's move forward. Digital, culture, media and sport is the one at the top. Now, the thing about this is that an awful lot of this is based around 5G and connectivity. I'm not going to go into all of the arguments around 5G. That's for another day. I mean, there is one part here and that is of interest to me, and that in terms of the very top project, where it's freeing up the 700 megahertz spectrum, which is an existing spectrum used from I think this one was previously used from television. So I do have concerns around 5G that maybe I'll come to at another point later on. But in terms of the utilisation of this spectrum, this would not cause any of the issues that, if anybody's looking at some of the problems that are anticipated around 5G, this particular spectrum is not part of those problems. Okay, so again, it's a matter of the costs, and I suppose one other thing in that, in around all of this various connectivity and stuff, is that I suppose it's something that I was thinking about it earlier on, and it kind of makes me think a little bit of something that, of all people, Jeremy Corbyn brought up prior to the previous election. He'd made this statement to say that I think for low-income households, mobile phones would be free, and obviously that was laughed at by an awful lot of people. And I've got a funny feeling he's looked at, or he's been advised by somebody around some of this type of infrastructure project, and come up with a little bit of a farcical policy. But in one way, it's not entirely without a tiny bit of merit. So I say, even the biggest idiot and that can have a little bit of merit sometimes. Because the thing of it is, all of these, if we remember back to when I did the was it episode 3, and I covered all of the revenues that are produced from the various streams. Within those revenue streams, there was nothing that said telecoms carriers. Now, why that's relevant is, all of these projects here and that are essentially the taxpayer paying for all of the infrastructure that those telecoms carriers would be critical to them in order for them to provide their service. So essentially, we're paying for everything that the telecoms carriers should be responsible for themselves, which does then beg the question as, why are we paying them? Why are we paying them whatever amount a month it is that you're paying for your telephone when we've bought all of the infrastructure? So, I mean, obviously in that, with anything, you end up with operating costs and that. I mean, so within an level of infrastructure and that, you've got maintenance and service and all this sort of stuff. But if this was done in terms of the very large amount of money being spent by the taxpayer, because I mean, some of these projects, they do turn around and say, well, it's not just government money, there's commercial involvement as well. I don't see it. And some of the other rhetoric and that's why I refer back to that statement that I mentioned in the oh god, what were they called, government estates management, where the government is the provider of choice. Well, if you're the provider of choice, that means that you've bought it all using taxpayer money, and it doesn't suggest that the carriers have got any involvement in that at all. So you have to sort of, this is where you have to sort of, when you're reading through these things, you have to try to link things together. So it does make me wonder a little bit as to what is actually going to be happening in the future in terms of these mobile phone providers in particular, and internet providers, because it's fairly similar to like with the well, I think BT are actually doing an awful lot of the laying of fibre optic cables. Obviously, what's going on in your countries and that, let me know. But it's just a bit curious that unless we're going to suddenly see a plan that comes out that says, right, okay, in the future, in order for the phone carriers, whether it's O2 or Virgin or whoever, that they're suddenly paying government to utilise the infrastructure that we've paid for. Unless we see that in the revenue streams later on, then I would question, why is it that we're paying for their equipment, if you see what I mean. So like I say, it's a bit of an unusual one, that. And I'd be loath to say that Jeremy Corbyn had a point, but he actually might have had a smidgen. He's a smidgen of a point. So anyway, DEFRA is the next one. Right. 2 large ICT contracts. Again, the key point with this one, this what they call the Unity programme, it's the amount of money, and when you consider that DEFRA and that, I mean, it's all the agriculture and all this sort of stuff and that, and forestry and what have you. What the fuck sort of what IT systems do they need that cost that much money? I don't, that's the part again that you just sort of I'd look at that and go, well, I don't quite understand what the need is there and what you're doing, and why is it so expensive? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure if you dug down into the proper details and that, you'd probably find out there's about 5 people sat there and that picking their nose and looking at porn on the computer, and apparently that's what the cost is. But anyway, so moving to Department for Education. Obviously, I'm going to end up with having problems with the Department for Education, but I'll deal with that in much more detail when I come to deep dive with them more specifically. But in terms of this one, we've got there's one project that's already been completed here, and that I don't understand. Social Work England. One of the key things that we've been told time and time and time and again is that social work is something that belongs within the health and social care department. So I don't quite understand what this has got to do with education. Obviously, within certain kids that go to school and that, there are going to be certain issues that social workers then become involved with, but that's a matter of cross departments. Departments sort of getting together and working together effectively, not having a social work department within the education sector. I find that one a little bit strange, to say the least. Then the second one that I've identified here, and that is the TOPS project, and moving from a multi-supplier to a single supplier, which I kind of understand it, because I mean this is about the testing services. I mean, again, I don't really see that as, I don't quite understand why that's necessarily something that's being put out as a project. I mean, yes, the testing systems. I mean, so you're talking about, I don't know what the system is these days. I mean, in my day, and it was something like the GCSE, O level, A level, and then you move into your degrees and things like that. I know all of that doesn't exist. Most of that doesn't exist anymore. But in terms of what the actual tests should involve and what they're supposed to be teaching them and things of this nature to lead up to those tests, surely they can do that within the Department of Education on their own. But anyway, it's slightly unusual. But so, right, just having one supplier, I mean, it kind of depends, really, doesn't it? Because whoever it is that's actually writing out the tests, are they really reliable across the entire spectrum of education? It's a little bit of an unusual one, that, and in most circumstances, but in most businesses, having a single source of supplier is not necessarily a benefit. You might think that it makes your life easier, it's more streamlined, and things of this nature, but you can find that if you're too reliant on a single supplier, that comes with problems as well. And if you've got an issue that arises with that single supplier, you've got no backup. So, yeah, I'm not too sure about the logic of that one. So anyway, right, you can see the totals that I've managed to come up with on an annual basis. So digital, culture, media and sport, 498 billion. DEFRA, 177 million. Yeah, obviously a long-term project. Department for Education, 2.2 billion. So all of these are going towards what will end up being the annual cost. Okay, how much is being spent of taxpayers' money to fund these projects, for which not all of them are successful. Keep that in mind. Right, so then we move into DFID, the Department for International Development, right at the top there. Now this is This is a strange bugger. So apparently it's a project, remember? So apparently we're going to pay £445 million to have an airport built at St Helena. Now, St Helena, for anybody that's not familiar with that, that's one of these islands stuck right out in the middle of nowhere. I think it's basically between the continents of, is it between the continents of Africa and America? So just smack in the middle of nowhere, basically. Now, they do already have an airport, just a small one. Now, the thing about this is that I checked on the population of St Helena yesterday, and they've got 6,082 people, and they need a £445 million airport. The GDP of St Helena is 39 million on average. I mean, so it does kind of beg the question as to what the hell is going to be happening in St Helena all of a sudden to require an airport like that. The only thing that could come to my mind was the government looking towards developing a new Epstein Island of some description. Who knows? These buggers, they get up to all sorts, don't they? But yeah, that doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me. So, moving into the Department for Transport below it. Right. So, the first one I picked up on was Crossrail. Now, this is one of those ones where I've managed to deduce a date to give me the annual values, because that's one of these projects that said, oh, we're going to be complete, and never seem to. The latest supposed date is to be completed by 2022. That's why I've utilised that information to give me the annual. I won't be surprised if it doesn't get complete, but hey ho. But again, that is another one of those projects that has caused an awful lot of upset in terms of the value of the project constantly increasing, and obviously missing schedules. But there you go. Again, that'll be a problem that I'll move into a bit later on. Now, the North of England programme. Yeah, where is that? Fourth from bottom. It's incredibly non-specific. And when you compare that to, again, the number of projects that are in there that are London, it's as if it's sort of like, well, okay, well, if we just fiddle around and chuck some money randomly, largely in certain people's pockets, but if we pretend that we're doing something around various train stations up north, then that constitutes development for the north. Yeah, I don't think so. So for that to be so non-specific is a little bit of a dampener for those up north if they think that they're getting well, I had 5 billion. Is that all? For all of the things that could be done up north, and that for 5 billion, that seems like a bit of a farce. But like I say, when you look at so many of the other projects and that have got something to do with London, it's just, yeah, it's all wrong. But anyway, the one thing I am glad of that they haven't got in the Department for Transport, but which I've picked up on previously in terms of the amount that we could save if we get rid of a lot of the green crap, is that they've not got a whole bunch of projects in there related to electric bloody cars that are going to spontaneously combust all over the place in the next 10 years. There's none of that kind of infrastructure within these projects. I'm sure I'm going to find them elsewhere. But anyway, these are the totals that we get. So for DFID, apparently we're going to pay £21 million a year for a GDP of 39. Anyway, and the Department for Transport, 7.3 billion. So not insignificant amounts of money every year that are going to go into the budget. Next one. You enjoying it yet? You love the data and that and my little spreadsheets. No, didn't think so. Right, so Department for Health and Social Care. Whole range of different projects here. First one is the Data Processing Service Programme and the Local Health and Care Records, where they've got similar problems. Again, there's something that'll be a link in the description, because this one has to be looked at from a historical perspective, because previously there was a large IT programme for the NHS, and it ended up being an £11 billion failure. So they gave out contracts to shit companies like Accenture, and Accenture basically and that just packed up and walked away. I mean, they were so crap at it and that they just gave up. And I'll guarantee they're going to be involved in all of this rubbish again. So apparently it seems like the genius plan now is to spend even more money and fuck it all up again, because they never ever ever have any clue as to what they're doing, these people. It really is an abomination. Now, the other part of interest here, and that is mentions of research. So if you see from the notes there and that of the projects, well, I've got how the project did previously fail, and then it says research, and then there's another project further down saying government-owned research. Again, this, if you remember when I mentioned in episode 6 when I was going into the Office for National Statistics as to what constitutes data, how should data be used, and can we actually gain value for it? Can we gain some public confidence to say, well, as long as we're not using your name specifically, you know, not assigning data to a specific individual or anything like that, is there something that could be done in the healthcare system to be able to generate revenue? And by releasing certain types of data into, whether it be the pharmaceutical sector or whichever one it is that's related to health and social care, so that they can actually start to develop, whether that's development of new medicines or understanding new ailments, illnesses, and what's working, what's not working, all this sort of stuff. So for them to be including research into this, and government-owned research in particular, it does kind of make me wonder whether this is actually part of a plan anyway. And again, where would the release of information be? And that to suggest that they are going to be generating revenue and therefore potentially reducing tax burdens, things of this nature, or increasing capabilities within the health sector. So little bits of terminology like that within these projects are quite important to pick up on, because there could be implications later on. And obviously that when it comes down to private information, of which healthcare is considered to be private information, there is an obligation to be notified of these things. Now, the IT sourcing program, which is, IT infrastructure sourcing program, there's an indication here in that they might be maintaining their own servers. Now, if you, as I said before, when it comes down to the 5G infrastructure and all this sort of stuff, there's indications there and that about owning this type of stuff. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. When I've looked into this sort of stuff previously and made certain suggestions in different reports, I have actually suggested that these types of things being part of government-owned infrastructure might actually make sense. So I wouldn't be concerned about that, but I would want to be at least notified. I mean, you kind of imagine that they would have their own service in certain sectors, particularly like within Ministry of Defence, for example. So it's picking up on these little bits of terminology that you can see when you start doing a little bit of a deep dive into these different projects, that you'd hope to see some level of benefit on a wider level. Now, one other program of interest. Well, no, there's two actually. Sorry. There's one that's the medical examiners program, which is particularly important as things stand at the moment, because it's talking about a system for when there is no coroner's investigation. So there's some level of data and that as to, cause of death and things of that nature. Obviously, we can tell from the moments and that from this Ponzi China virus, where literally everybody is being claimed to be a COVID death rather than having an actual autopsy. And it does strike me again as one of these areas where it's, death by agenda or death by consensus rather than actual autopsy. So, forgetting what we knew yesterday, moving into this brave new world that they're constantly going on about, the Great Reset, which is then going to be based on this, essentially incredibly poor data. I mean, if you've got data that is then essentially going to be based on guesswork, well, I think he died from this, or I think they died from that, and let's put a system together around that, something's not right there. So that would be one that I would question. Then you might notice already, if anybody's been paying attention, to look at what I've got written up there, and that, because there's the one that says the NHS UK transforming the website, and look at the cost of that for a fucking website. Absolutely mental. Can't be doing with that. So again, very large amounts of money, not necessarily all of these programs entirely justified, perhaps, but like I said, when I move forward with all this, I'm not going to be going, right, all of these projects need to be stopped now. That wouldn't be the recommendation. And apart from that, by the time I managed to get in charge anyway, all of these projects would have been long finished. So yeah, but it's worth a deep dive. So anyway, DWP, Department for Work and Pensions. Now these people are absolutely notorious for fucking up everything that they do. There's the lunatic cost of this universal credit program. I don't really understand the amount of money that they're spending on this, whether it's actually providing any benefit at all. I mean, I do kind of understand what the theory was, but as with everything, especially when it's a government project, the implementation is absolutely appalling. And I don't think it's not without interference from people wanting it to be appalling, but yeah, that's a different matter. Right, the Health Transformation Programme. This one is a particular issue, fairly similar to universal credits and that, where it includes this what's known as the PIP programme. I can't remember what that stands for, and I didn't make a note of it because it's not that fucking important. But basically, it's this programme where people are checked to see their level of disability. That kind of thing decides on whether they're actually fit for work or not, fit for purpose, and what the extent of their benefits would be as a result. This has proved to be an absolute disaster because it's been run by people that clearly couldn't give a shit, don't give a toss what the person in front of them is actually like. There's been people that have turned up to these, I don't know what you call them, it's like an interview type of thing, but they've turned up to these things and that where they've been quite clearly incredibly ill, and some moron has just sat there and ticked the boxes and then just put it through to say, oh yeah, absolutely fine, perfect, fit to work, and then that person has died the next week. So it's not been good. It's not a good record. So yeah, but again, this program lasting for 3 years as well. So I'm not confident of the capabilities and the competence of programs along those lines. Right, so into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The Echo 2 programme is the one that I've picked up on here, on account of having no financial information. Add that exemption again. Considering it's about, you know, the connectivity and voice and video and that for the various different offices, I'm not entirely sure why that one would be considered to be as secretive as it obviously is. I mean, surely to Christ, I mean, if you've got, should we say, operatives in another country, surely they wouldn't be using that sort of, can I borrow your phone sort of thing. They wouldn't be doing that. So, but then again, these days, like I say, you've got that many bloody incompetent people, I wouldn't be at all surprised, but there you go. So, again, totals. Health and social care. What is that? Yeah, a billion. Yeah. No, hang on. Yep, 1 billion, 1.3 billion. When the numbers get that long, you tend to lose the plot a little bit. The DWP one and that, I mean, being more than the health and social care, the 2.2 billion, I mean, absolutely ludicrous. And then the Foreign and Commonwealth, 211 million. You having fun yet? So, HMRC. Right, what have I picked up here? Sensitive data, that we securing our technical future. All right. Yeah, again, this one is around the terminology that they use and that, because it's got in there around using cloud hosting. Well, cloud hosting is one of those terms that basically doesn't really mean an awful lot. It just means somebody else's servers. So the question would be, whose servers? If governments from all these other departments are spending a vast amount of money developing their own servers, then why can't they just skip in on that one? Why do they need to be cloud hosting? In terms of the context of various other projects, the amount of money we're talking about there and that is not staggering, but still, it just seems a slightly unusual one considering the terminology and the projects used from other departments. So that would require a little bit of a look. So the Home Office. Now this one, again, there's a link to an article or there will be a link to the article in the description around this Asylum Accommodation and Support Transformation, AAST. This project, yes, did run out. Ran the course 2016 to 2019. Right? Spending of close to, sorry, no glasses. You get a good view of the top of my head now. You tell me if I'm bold or a bold patch. 4.6 billion. Sorry. When I've got my normal spreadsheet, it's a lot bigger than this. But anyway, 4.6 billion they've spent over that 3-year period. Now, this is during a period of time when we've been constantly told how, you know, immigration is going to be brought down and all this sort of stuff. Well, immigration and asylum is obviously not the same thing. What the hell level of an asylum seeker has been coming into this country to require that much money to accommodate them? And even worse than that, I've put the little note by the side of it, a new contract has already been issued, which I think I might have mentioned in a previous episode, I can't remember. But Serco and Mears have been awarded 2.9 billion this January. And a lot of this is going towards putting these boatloads that are being shipped over and assisted by the French of economic migrants, not asylum seekers, and they're all being put up in expensive hotels up and down the UK. So 4.6, did I say? Let's just say 4.6 plus another 2.9. I mean, staggering amounts of money for illegal migrants coming into the illegal economic migrants coming into the UK, all being housed and paid for and looked after on the taxpayer's dime. This is definitely a big no-no. Definitely something severely wrong there, and the criticism that is being levied towards the likes of, well, Priti Patel and anybody before her, and I've been looked at ever since this 2016, and I dare say there was probably stuff before that as well. It's just no, not right at all, and that one seriously does need to be looked at, because obviously I'm living in a location that where an awful lot of them and that come over at the moment, because I've got the seafront, and that's literally just, I don't know, half a mile away, whatever it is. Anyway, so Cyclamen project, is that a justified one? Well, I mean, justified in terms of why they've not disclosed. I suppose, I mean, it could be in that, because, I mean, this is, I mean, how many people these days are going round, I mean, you know, it's detecting if somebody's got nuclear or radiological materials on them. You know, it sounds a little bit 1960s fucking James Bond spy film sort of stuff, doesn't it? I mean, I have a nuclear bomb in my jacket. It doesn't really happen anymore, does it? Not that it ever did, I dare say. Yeah, so being able to detect that at airports and whatever, I don't know. It seems a bit of a strange one, that. Right. The digital service at the border. Right, so we're moving into the Home Office now. I think I might have forgotten to say that. Yeah, moving into the Home Office. Now, they'd started this particular project 2 years before Brexit. Yeah, 2014. I'm glad I'll get my notes right and that, even if I've sat here and I can't bloody remember anything. So yeah, it started in 2014. So they've already been running this project for the 2 years. Then you got Brexit. And then immediately after Brexit, you've got all these MPs turning around and saying that technology at borders is a fairy tale. And, you know, it doesn't exist, and it's not possible to do all of these different things. Well, clearly it was. I mean, I knew that it was possible anyway, and that because I've worked with RFID systems and things of that nature. So, I mean, I always knew it was bullshit, but as soon as they were already planning on introducing these types of systems, and they'd already been running the project for 2 years, it kind of shows the hypocrisy and stupidity of a whole range. I mean, whether MPs on either side, because an awful lot of the Conservatives that was supposed, I mean, so for example, you had Theresa May that came in after Cameron had left the sinking ship, so to speak. Theresa May comes in and basically never said a word to say, right, all of you lot need to shut the fuck up, because we've been running this project and we know that it works. Implementation is not going to be an issue. I mean, I was having arguments with people with that constantly online, where they said, no, it doesn't, it's a pipe dream, it doesn't exist. I said, of course it bloody does. Anyway, so again, little bits of detail that you tend to pick up when you're running through this sort of stuff that show how the rhetoric coming out of certain people's mouths was just blatant ignorance and lies. Also a biometrics program that started in 2014. That is another area where I've had some small involvement in that side of things, and it tends to be not as good as it's made out to be. I mean, it tends to be the case in an awful lot when it comes to technology. People saying, "Oh, we can do this and we can do that," you know, and you know, it's all that. Oh, yeah, we're all going to be flying in our cars and that in the next 5 minutes. A lot of it is overhyped bollocks, and I think biometrics is one of them. the potential for error is somewhat high, shall we say. But, you know, I understand them looking into it. Will they get into a issue later on around privacy again? Probably. But yeah, that's one that needed to be highlighted anyway. So obviously there's a few projects in the Home Office that have already been completed, so they come off the total. So let's move forward a bit quicker. So HMRC annual basis 467 million. Home Office 1 billion. An awful lot of these departments it's IT project, technology project. The amount of money for a lot of this stuff is questionable. Right, Ministry of Defence. I'm not going to go into too much detail around the Ministry of Defence because, well, some of them, and that's, I mean, you'll see by the side note where I've been able to estimate what the values are based on data that was included in the document that I downloaded. I don't really want to go into too much detail around this one because obviously this is public information already, so I'm not disclosing anything that I shouldn't be. I don't really want to dig into the details for each one because, yeah, things that I know about various different projects and things like that, it's for those of you around the world, none of your fucking business. Look after your own bloody military. There is one particular point that I will pick up on though, and that is in regard to something that I can say because it's essentially on that, it's old technology that we're talking about here. They've got something called the Future Beyond Line of Sight project. Now, this is in relation to the existing satellite communications, which is called Skynet. And I've got a horrible feeling Skynet was the name that they used. Was that the one that they used for Terminator? I don't know why these people always have some name that's plucked out of the... I mean, it's half the problem that they keep plucking names out of sci-fi films, which just goes to show how fucking ridiculous these people are. But anyway, line of sight, for anybody that's not familiar with it, it just essentially means that you'll have your source of communication that then is sent directly to the port from which it can be read, so on and so forth. So you have a hub that is nearby that comes through to your modem, whether that is through a fixed line or whether that is through a frequency, whatever. Some of the terminology I forget because it's a number of years since I did this one, and this is why I know about it. If it's fixed line, obviously it travels through the line, it doesn't have a problem. If it's based on a bandwidth, would be more accurate, I suppose. If it's based on a bandwidth, if it can't see directly the modem that it's going to, it tends to struggle to get there. So if you've got a building that's right in front of you and you're transmitting a signal, it hits that building and it's not going to go to what it is that's behind it. So what you've got is a system that's called multi-point to multi-point. And this is the system that I was involved with out in San Francisco in about 2002, I think this was. So it does end up being a much faster, much better system. And no, it's not based on some great high level frequency bandwidth. You know, it's not going to sear through your head and, you know, kill everybody. Nothing along those lines. It just basically means that, well, the system that we had at the time, you would have the highest point in any particular location that you're at. We did a test in a rural area in Japan, because obviously rural locations tend to be quite difficult. We obviously did one in the in the city as well, but did rural as well, so we could demonstrate the capabilities across both. So you have the highest point, you put your hub on there, so you've got your satellite communications that it can get line of sight. Obviously cloud, weather, things like that can sometimes interrupt, but generally speaking you've got good line of sight communication. But it's from the hub to each of the other communication ports. That's where multipoint to multipoint comes in. It's kind of, I suppose, a little bit like a VPN, in so much as that whilst you're drawing down the data from where you are at your particular portal, the hub will transmit to another portal, which then will transmit to yours. So essentially, if you've got a building in the way, you can go around it. You can send from the hub to a port here, and then that port to your port, which is on the other side of the building. So you don't have to have direct line of sight. That's essentially the little, rather probably badly explained perspective as to what that is. So the fact that the Ministry of Defence are doing something like that now kind of suggests to me that they're doing a little bit of catch up, because like I say, I was doing that in 2002. So like I say, I don't want to go into too much detail with the other stuff because, yeah, bollocks. 9.5 billion actually for Ministry of Defence, considering normally a lot of their expenditure and that is a little bit dodgy. That's not a bad figure considering. Right, Ministry of Justice. Well, my notes here say not much to add. So there you go. That's good, isn't it? I don't think there is really that much to add, is there? It's fairly benign projects. That's essentially, it's all just, you know, if you looked into all of these different things, would the amount of money be worth it? Probably not. You know, buildings, prisons, blah blah. National, just so you know that you've got the so MOJ is Ministry of Justice, NCA is the National Crime Agency, and ONS is obviously the Office for National Statistics. So, bollocks, so let's just move on. Estimated annual costs, MOJ 6.6 billion, National Crime Agency 662 million, Office for National Statistics 90 million. I suppose I should really say in that, in terms of them looking to do this 2021 consensus. Again, I've mentioned that previously, and that is what sort of time frames should there be consensus, and how often should be the access to the data? Because it is important for people across not just government but across business and local authorities and all this type of stuff, and that to have regular, updated, accurate information. It is an important consideration. So, yeah, I mean, whether it would come to these sort of levels of costs or not is a different matter. But anyway, so let's move on. That's the major data dump out of the way. The total, and now this is the annual cost. So there you get the 46 billion. So that would be per year, and that's got to be added on to the budget. So an important number to keep in mind. Out of the annual reports that you can get from the project's authority, because again, slight issue here and that in terms of them saying, well, okay, this is how much each project costs, but they don't have a proper figure for the actual department itself. So I have a feeling that there would actually be more costs involved in this, but anyway, these are the estimates that I'm making. And from the diving through the different figures, I can obviously then see that 12 out of the 16 that they include in their report have got near as damn it a reasonably good figure. So 4 of them incorrect. Now you would expect your government to be correct across the board. if they're reporting accurately, with integrity, openness, honesty, blah blah. So just goes to show that when you do these sort of deep dives in government, they do show their incompetence. It should be 100% accurate. Now the chart below, this project management chart, it will link in a little bit with something I'm going to say about another department in a minute, but they do tend to stick in their reports this type of graphic to make it look like that they know what they're doing, and oh, we've got this process put in place, and we've got our, and you'll see within their reports, if you do read it, we've got our portfolio manager, our program manager, and then our project manager, trying to come across as actually knowing what the hell they're doing. This graph on its own tells me that they don't know what they're doing, because the types of metrics that you should be including in this kind of chart, which I forget the bloody name of what it is supposed to be. It's just a project management chart. It shows the milestones and the different phases and what the different metrics are supposed to be, and then the program life and all this sort of stuff. It's done badly. It's done badly. I mean, feasibility, appraise and select, define, deliver. Really? Really? You think you've missed out a few steps there. So that's a competency problem. So one of the key parts that I would suggest in terms of this infrastructure projects authority is that they actually need to have a review and reform as to around their own levels of competency, and a bit more disclosure around their staff numbers and their costs and things of this nature. So there needs to be more work done there. But like I say, in terms of a good explanation as to why projects don't work out the way that they should, that kind of graphic can give you a very good indication as to where they've got competency deficiency. So we've only got 2 more departments to go, and luckily they're both quite quick. The Privy Council, very little to say about this. This is more to do with it's actually more to do with culture, tradition, formalities associated with the Crown. So I'm not going to attack this. I'm not really going to attack the fact that, I mean, it would be nice for them to put the numbers up as the way they're supposed to. That would be a fair criticism. But I mean, I can see that they've got 7 employees. It's headed by Jacob Rees-Mogg at the moment. I mean, I have given a link in the descriptions and that for something for you to download, just as a possible piece of interest. And it gives you the historical list of organisations that have got the status of Royal Charter, and that goes all the way back to 1155. Now, having the status of Royal Charter it doesn't really mean anything, to be honest. But it's one of these things that that people can be a little bit snobby. I've got a Royal Charter, don't you know? They can't turn around and use any sort of particular logo or claim to be royal anything, but it's just that little bit of snobbery that's involved. But the one thing that I did notice when I was running right the way through the list, as I tend to do, I did come across the Project Management Institute, and that does go back to what I said previously, that considering you've got the project authority that are obviously quite clearly then working together with the Project Management Institute, they might have a Royal Charter, but they still don't know what they're doing. I mean, this is something that I first came across back in, oh Christ, what, 2008 maybe, because I had my project management qualifications both on project management professional and also certified international project manager. So I had those 2 qualifications. The thing that I don't think I have those qualifications anymore, and this is the part of it that I don't like, where in order to maintain those qualifications, you have to pay a fee every year, which is taking the piss, isn't it? I mean, it's cash cow. And they'll try to justify that by saying, well, okay, at the end of each year, you'll then be sent through what new developments there have been in project management. And we've now got the latest version of project management. And essentially, it just seems like they're getting paid to come together and go, oh, okay, we need to make something up, just to make us look like we're actually doing something. And the more they do that, the more they fuck up the actual critical parts of the process. So you'll end up with, I mean, somewhere I've got a couple of the folders where there's the different levels of the project management and then the different variations and all this. And you read through most of it and you think, what an absolute shower of shite. And in 2008, I was having some meetings with the Project Management Institute, and I decided not to get my accreditation from them. I got it from America, because they did ask me if I would help in terms of giving some online instructions to, you know, you get the various groups that get together and that can't turn up to specific locations. So it was all done online, and they wanted me to be one of the tutors, and I said no, because so many of the processes that they have in there are just not right, particularly when it comes down to international project management. But the problem that I really identified in 2008 was I went to have a meeting with one company in particular that specialises in project management on a commercial basis, and I had a word with the chief executive officer, and I said to him, well, yes, I've run through all of these different processes and that to get this particular qualification, but I'm finding that, quite frankly, a lot of it is bollocks. And he did admit that the biggest problem that they've got is that the so-called project manager, if you don't have this project management certificate, you don't get to be employed as a project manager. And the problem is that the people that have got this certificate are going in there basing everything they do on this structured system from the authorised, the Royal Charter, and it's utterly worthless. They don't understand how it actually applies on a real case basis. And so that is something that whether I would dive into that onto the education side of things, potentially, but it can become a bit of a problem. There's a nice little anecdote for you. Anyway, so Privy Council, not like I say, I'm not going to have a go at them. If there are certain things that are what I consider to be important to British culture and tradition, it might seem unusual to outsiders. I don't care. I'll leave that one alone. Civil service. Right. Unsurprisingly, no data. Yeah. Because again, honesty, integrity, transparency, blah, blah, doesn't exist. What you do see when you go onto the particular page for them is this absolute bollocks again of all this, the diversity. Oh, we're so diverse. What is this champion shit? An LGB, what the hell are they called now? LGB and TI champion. What the hell is that? LGBT. I mean, I remember the T, but what's the I? Indian? I don't know. I don't know what that is. And then you've got this other. What's she a champion of? Oh, the gender champion, because she's got a gender. What the fuck does that mean? And a race champion. We should have Usain Bolt there, surely. I mean, idiocy, absolute meaningless rhetoric, bollocks, bullshit. And when you go through, like I said, I mean, I don't know how many times I've had to say this and that, but when you go back into the other departments and you look through the different numbers, when they're talking about this equality and that it has to be representative of the nation, and they essentially, if you're a white male and a straight white male, you're fucked, because they just want to push all of this crap. It's just utter nonsense. And it's all over this fucking civil service thing. And it just goes to show, I mean, if you remember back, I can't remember when it was that I did it, and I showed the number of people that were the Labour supporters, so basically all the people that are supporting a failed ideology, and the ones that were pushing, that had been in there from Tony Blair's time, pushing this bloody Agenda 2030, which is now Great Reset. Those sorts of arseholes are responsible for this. And so one of the key things with the civil service is that it really does need to be root and branch. Who are these people that are pushing this bullshit? And if you're not getting rid of them, at least take them out of responsibility and stop them from pushing this absolute bottom dribble. Especially that any of them, that if you can identify in that, if they've got any sort of connections whatsoever to the United Nations, World Economic Forum, get them out. I mean, in terms of trying to display what the civil service is on a web page and to have all of that crap on there, awful, absolutely awful. I've put the board and the people board. There's several other boards as well, and that's just because that was the only way that I could identify any sort of numbers that are supposedly employees around this shit. But civil service is obviously wider than these people, which is why they should have much better numbers. But yeah, that's a problem with the civil servants. Cannot be arsed with it. So that would be the Cabinet Office done. Done did. Only 24, 23, whatever left to do. So the spreadsheet that you won't be able to see. This is what the Cabinet Office looks like once that investigation is complete. So as you can see, 47 billion. That's a large number, causes a problem. Now the number of staff that I've got there is, hold on a second. No, fuck it. The number of staff on there are 5,943. It's not going to be right. It's not going to be right because, like I say, there's the amount of times where the departments where the real data is not available. But I'll keep it going in the total so I know where we stand at the end and what the total workforce is supposed to be. I'll see if the numbers tally. Again, that's why I'm doing it with the budget as well. And obviously you can tell that there is going to be a problem with the budget because for this it's 54%. Now if you remember, the Attorney General's office was there's 22 more departments to come. Oh, and 212 other offices. So yeah, this is going to be a problem because the Attorney General's office was 0.89% of the total budget, which using the period of 2019 to 2020. So we're already up to 54.89% of the whole budget just from those two departments. Now, when you consider, like I say, you've got 22 more to go and then 212 others, the numbers are not going to add up. So we're going to have problems. Now, like I say, I know that they're going to have stuff there. They're saying, oh, certain stuff is off balance sheets, not part of the budget and what have you. But you have to have the true picture and you have to be able to understand where things are going, because otherwise this is how you end up with all of these black holes. I mean, I can remember back in 2010 that they said that when Labour had gone, there was this massive black hole in the Ministry of Defence. Well, as far as I'm seeing at the moment, there's black holes all over the bloody place. So with this size And this type of information, you can already see it. I mean, like I say, I'll keep repeating this. There's no way that anybody can say that we live in a capitalist system. There's no way that anybody can say, oh, capitalism is to blame for this, that and the other. It's not. This government is too big for this to be a capitalist system, and it's not a free market either, so it's not a capitalist system. Now, the problem then becomes that when you've got a system set up like this, and where there isn't the transparency and all this type of nature, then society as a whole tends to be formed of, whether we like it or not, it tends to be this lead by example. So if you've got your government structure set out in such a way where everything that is being declared to the public is not honest information, then that seeps out across the wider society. It will creep out into corporations as well. So when people turn around and think, well, okay, well, the corporates, they're all terrible people. World Economic Forum ones generally are, but they're setting the example of doing things in a very arse-about-face way and entirely unprofessional. And with people, as I've demonstrated with Dowden and that they're in positions that they clearly don't know what they're talking about. So when you'll get these people to just complaining about things that they don't understand. So if you imagine that you have these people that say, okay, so socialism is the answer, which then moves into communism is the answer. It is a step-by-step process. You can't avoid it. You're essentially saying that you want to promote a system that would be even worse than this. So they would not be making any kind of solution. They would be making problems so much worse. Government makes matters worse in its current format. Until we'd actually sort out the issues of government and people actually understand what these systems that have been set in place are and how it does have the influence across all levels of society, all levels of business, until they actually understand how these things work, you're not going to find any solutions. They'll all be standing around shouting and screaming and saying, oh, this is wrong and that is wrong, all pointing towards a problem that either doesn't exist or is entirely the wrong problem. So that's why this kind of process is important for people to understand, because if anybody ever dared think that whether it is on a national level or this world governance bullshit, you are literally going to cause an absolute clusterfuck. It's going to be an absolute mess. I mean, some socialist prat tell me that so far any of this represents a good logic-based system, competent system, that you should all want to see expanded and owning all assets and dictating what everybody does. Already I can see that this is wrong. I knew it beforehand, but you know, you have to be able to provide the evidence for it. But it's still very early stages of the process. I want to be able to get the proper full picture, so then we can actually do, as the title suggested, the Sisyphus complex solution. We find out what the problems are. We find out what the solutions are. We stop making the same mistakes. We stop rolling that bloody rock up the hill. So, obviously the ITU number went into the cumulative taxpayer savings identified so far, so 4.1 billion, not a huge leap from previously. And the things that I've included in the developments is to abolish GEM. You can see that near the bottom there, GEM. So that's estates management, whatever the fuck it was, government estates management. You don't need it. It's basically doing the same role as somebody else, and the people that run it don't know what the fuck they're doing. I would reform and certainly review the the project authority, and I most certainly would take a large pair of scissors to the civil service. So that would be the policy development. Okay. I think I might have actually come to the end of the episode, and I don't know how long I've been going on for, but it doesn't matter. You know, I've come to the end of the Cabinet Office anyway, which is what I wanted to do this week. I will be making some little bits of adjustments on the ending, but I'll probably do that hopefully in time for next week, when hopefully I'll also bring back the FOWEFUN segment. So, oh crikey, as I said previously, in that you have to understand how much work goes into these sorts of things, and I'm sure with a lot of people that you look at this and you think, oh my god, that's so fucking boring. And it just happens that I take interest in this sort of stuff. What can I tell you? I like to get the right details. I like to know exactly what's going on. I like to know where everybody's money's being spent, where it's being wasted, what level are you being lied to. When you've heard previously the statements from Donald Trump where he said drain the swamp, it really is a swamp. It doesn't matter which country it is. So, like I say, I mean, figure it out for yourselves, and that do similar sorts of process to your own abilities and levels. You know, you don't have to do literally everything that I do. Be good if you did. Like I say, when it comes down to the macro picture of the different process stages that I'll be running, the macro stages, and that is certainly going to help to understand what's happening in other countries, so that we can figure out where we get the mutual benefit, you know. So, a bit of a data dump for you. Like I say, you might want to press pause in certain places to have a look. If you wanted to really check into the details of what I've shown around the project authority, you're probably better off downloading the Excel sheet for yourself. Not mine, I keep that for myself, but the data that's the data that is publicly available from them. Like I said, mine's all nicely laid out and much more easily understood than theirs, but oh well. So I think that'll do it. If I haven't bored you all to tears with a massive data dump, I'll figure out what I'm going to call. I could even call this episode data dump, who knows. But a bit more forward along the process, keeping things going, and yeah, have a good week, and I'll come back with yet more really interesting information for you next week. Alright, take care, bye bye.